And as Democrats rally around Kamala Harris's presidential bid, some Republicans are speaking out against Donald Trump and voicing their support instead for the vice president. That includes our next guest, who yesterday wrote an op-ed with this title: "Why, as a Republican mayor, I support Kamala Harris over Trump." Republican John Giles, the mayor of Mesa, Arizona, the state's third largest city, wrote this: "I believe my party has a moral and ethical responsibility to restore faith in our democratic institutions. In the spirit of the late Senator John McCain's motto, Country First, I call on other Arizona Republicans to join me in choosing country over party this election and to vote against Donald Trump." And Mayor Giles joins us now. Mayor, good morning. Thank you for being with us. Let's start with the reaction you are getting from your fellow Republicans. Have any taken you up on your offer? Also, have others been sharply critical?
Yes and yes. I mean, I think the negative response was something that I expected, and it certainly has been there. But frankly, I've been a little taken back by the quantity and the quality of the positive response that I've gotten from Republicans, from former Republicans, from independents. So I think sometimes we, the extremes in my party get such a large amount of attention. It's easy to forget that I think still the majority of Americans and the majority of Republicans are in the center on the political spectrum, and are very open to looking for alternatives that are not extreme.
So, Mr. Mayor, tell us why, in your estimation, Donald Trump should not be returned to the White House.
Well, I'm obviously reluctant to as a Republican, I love to endorse Republicans, and so this was a pretty thoughtful process. Also being a mayor, my preference is to avoid getting involved in public partisan fighting whenever possible. But there are certain times that the question that is presented is a moral one and an ethical one and a question of character, and silence is not an option. So that's my argument to my fellow Republicans, that this is not a year that we can follow tradition or follow misplaced loyalty and vote for a Republican at the top of the ticket. Donald Trump has demonstrated that he lacks the character, lacks the commitment to the rule of law and to the United States Constitution to qualify as an elected official, let alone as President of the United States.
Mayor, thanks for coming on so bright and early this morning. Everyone's watching Arizona to see which way it breaks, because, of course, it's a must-win for both parties in terms of both the Senate race, but then also, of course, the presidential. What's your sense about sort of where the state is going, especially given the abortion referendum that will also be on the ballot this fall? What's your just gut from what you're hearing from people in your community about where Arizona is headed?
I think Arizona is very much in play. I think you're likely to see Ruben Gallego, a Democrat, win the Senate seat. I think there are other Democrats that are going to do well here. As you mentioned, we do have a state constitutional amendment on abortion that's on the ballot that I think is going to draw, that had twice as many signatures as was required, and it is going to pass comfortably in our state. But in the presidential race, Trump has been ahead by 5 or 10 points. So I think the change on the ticket, having the vice president to assume the top of the ticket, I think that's brought a lot of energy nationwide, but also in Arizona. So I think that gap is closing every day. And Arizona is going to be very competitive, but it's going to be very close when it comes to the presidential race in Arizona.
Mayor Elise Jordan here. As you wrote in your op-ed, Arizona has long embraced a John McCain style of conservatism and maverick, willing to test and go outside the typical norms. How much of a drag do you think that Kari Lake, the prospective Republican nominee, the likely nominee, is on the presidential ticket for Republicans in Arizona?
Well, I don't expect her to be successful. I mean, you even see that the Trump campaign seems to be trying to distance themselves from her a little bit. She's so over the top that she turns people off in Arizona. So I expect that Ruben Gallego is going to win comfortably in that race. Although we'll see today if Kari Lake even wins her primary. I think a lot of people on the Republican side have seen that she's not going to do well in the general election here. And there is an alternative to Kari Lake on the Republican primary ballot today, a rural sheriff. So we'll see how that turns out.
All right. Republican Mayor of Mesa, Arizona, John Giles, thank you for joining us this morning.
Thank you.
Joining us now from Philadelphia is NBC News correspondent Dasha Burns, national political reporter at The Washington Post, Isaac Arnsdorf as well, to talk all about this. Dasha, if you will, start us off, because Georgia's former governor, Roy Barnes, telling the AGC, the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, that he is confident that Harris has more than a fighting chance there, saying this: his advice to her strategists: focus on younger Georgians, quit worrying about angry old white men, and contrast her background as a prosecutor with Trump's legal troubles. Is that what the campaign is focusing on, especially in a state like Georgia, where she'll be tonight?
Well, look, all around it's a completely different battleground strategy, right? The Biden campaign was concerned about Georgia not looking good there. They were much more focused on the blue wall, on Michigan, on Pennsylvania. But with Harris, Georgia is absolutely in play. They are focusing on it. They are building out their operation in that state. They've already opened 4 new field offices, hired 7,500 new volunteers in that state. And yeah, they can have the luxury of speaking to a younger audience in a different way, just because of that difference in age, the difference in demographic, the difference in background between Harris and Biden, and they're certainly going to be taking advantage of that. I
know time is ticking for Veep Stakes, and I know that you're in Pennsylvania for a reason. The possibility of the governor there being chosen as the vice president's possible vice presidential nominee. What are you hearing?
Yeah, he's been really visible here over the last week or so. He just stopped by a youth basketball program here in North Philly, where they've invested some money. He shot some hoops and talked to reporters about his history with Vice President Kamala Harris, telling us that he met her back in 2006, that he used her model as AG in California as inspiration for what he did here as AG in Pennsylvania. And I did ask him about his own prospects for VP. I asked especially about the history that a Harris-Shapiro ticket might make. Harris, of course, being a black woman at the top of that ticket, but he would also make history if selected and if elected as a man of Jewish faith. Take a listen to our conversation.
What would a Jewish VP nominee mean in this moment?
Again, I think this is a deeply personal decision for the vice president to make. Who she wants to run with, who she wants to govern with, and who can help best move America forward. I think there are so many people within the Democratic Party who are extraordinary people, extraordinary public servants, and she will make the best decision for her and the country going forward.
You've been very careful about not saying you want the job, but Governors Gretchen Whitmer and Governor Roy Cooper took themselves out of the running. Would you be willing to say you don't want to take yourself out of it?
I think this is a decision that the vice president needs to make. I'm not going to sort of get into the hypotheticals.
And look, we talked about Georgia, but Pennsylvania also, of course, a critical battleground state, and he has a really high approval rating here. He's governed as a bipartisan leader, trying to bring Democrats and Republicans together. So if the Harris campaign is looking for that kind of moderate to bring a little bit of the swing voters into the fold, then Shapiro might have a leg up there.
Isaac, I want to talk about this new reporting that you have out there, just breaking really in the last couple of minutes or so about Project 2025. The director stepping down. Walk us through it.
Yeah, so, Project 2025 has become, in recent months, you hear about almost as much as Trump in terms of what the Democrats are attacking and kind of using Project 2025 interchangeably with Trump's agenda for a second term. Even though there is a lot of overlap, both in terms of personnel, likely alumni of Trump's first term, likely to return in a second term, and a lot of the proposals themselves, there's a lot of overlap. But that has really gotten under the skin of the Trump campaign, insisting that no one speaks for Trump except Trump. And they really have not liked all this bad publicity that the Heritage Foundation and Project 2025 has been generating for them. So now the project is winding down the policy piece. There's not going to be any more policy promotion coming out of Project 2025. They're still doing the personnel piece, which is they have a database of applicants to serve in a second administration. And the director is leaving, and everyone is kind of trying to use this as an opportunity to get Project 2025 out of the limelight, to try to smooth things over with the Trump campaign. But obviously, the Democrats are going to say not so fast.
So in addition to the bad publicity that he's getting from Project 2025, he's also having to field some bad publicity when it comes to his VP pick, J.D. Vance. And I know that you were reporting on this call in which J.D. Vance had with donors, because Donald Trump essentially saying, listen, Kamala Harris at the top of the ticket doesn't change anything for us. It doesn't really change our strategy. We're just as confident as we were before. And yet in this call with donors, with J.D. Vance, he in fact says Harris doesn't have the same baggage as the president, as Joe Biden. Harris is a lot younger and is obviously not struggling in the same ways that Joe Biden did. Walk us through more of what was heard on this phone call, what's happening inside the Trump camp.
Well, basically acknowledging what we can all see about the new strengths that Harris has brought to the Democratic campaign for the White House relative to how Biden was struggling. And the only issue is that that was at odds with the Trump campaign insisting that nothing had changed. So in private with these donors, Vance was acknowledging those strengths that Harris brings, and it really comes down to just how less defined she is, right? How well everyone already had their minds made up about Trump and Biden, and Harris is a much less well-known figure, and so that creates an opportunity for both campaigns to tell a story about who she is. And Harris has been trying to do that in a positive way, and you saw today the Trump campaign coming after her with their first ad directed against her, focusing on her role leading the administration's response to migration at the southern border, but they have not exactly settled on what their attack line against her is going to be. And Vance, in those remarks to donors, and we've seen this from Trump in recent interviews, also kind of previewing a variety of tacks that they might try while they see what connects.
Dasha, quickly here, any reporting from inside the Harris camp that they're going to capitalize on this moment of J.D. Vance kind of acknowledging they have a tougher battle with Kamala Harris at the top of the ticket?
Well, look, they're already trying to brand him before he can really brand himself, using words like weird, a kind of online, younger approach to attacking the other side of the aisle. So I have no doubt that they're going to use this moment of a bad news cycle for the Trump campaign with J.D. Vance and a moment of momentum for the Harris campaign. And that big question mark still about who her running mate will be, which will be another a moment for the Harris campaign to galvanize some attention and excitement.
And we could get that name any moment now, really. Dasha Burns, thank you. Isaac Arnsdorf, thank you as well.
Kamala Harris also making news in another way, releasing her very first TV ad as the Democratic nominee. It's the start of what the campaign says will be a $50 million blitz.
This campaign is about who we fight for. We believe in a future where every person has the opportunity not just to get by, but to get ahead.
That is the opening message, and it is an opening message later than any other nominee in American history for the reasons we all know, 98 days out. Harris in Georgia for that rally, as mentioned. This is some footage of her just a little bit earlier today. You may recall how pivotal this state was for the Biden-Harris win in 2020. The Harris campaign is putting time and energy here. A local paper says they're opening 3 offices across the state with dozens of events and capitalizing on what they see as a surge of enthusiasm among younger voters that has been defined by the early days of her bid. Now, how close was Georgia in 2020? Well, about 11,000 votes, basically a couple of 0.03, if you look at it that way, 49.5 to 49.2. And that's why, if you remember the infamous call Donald Trump made where he was trying to basically find or steal votes, it was in this state of Georgia, remember?
All I want to do is this. I just want to find 11,780 votes, which is one more than we have.
Legally, That is evidence in the former president's criminal trial in Washington, if it's ever held. Politically, it's just a reminder of why everyone's in Georgia tonight. That was the margin. Trump lost it, but it was, by all accounts, narrow. Now, Harris and her VP pick, according to Reuters, will be out on the trail next week, which means by inference, we're going to have a pick soon, and they're going to be giving rallies like this.
I know Donald Trump's type. Donald Trump wants to take our country backward. We're not going back. We're not going back. Do we believe in the promise of America? And are we ready to fight for it?
You hear the chants and the energy. There are many ways we followed that the Democratic Party seems newly excited and united. The Post reports the Trump campaign insists Harris replacing Biden has not changed the race or hurt them. But look to the ticket itself. J.D. Vance telling people that he is actually somehow frustrated with what will be a harder challenge that they must face.
All of us were hit with a little bit of a political sucker punch. The bad news is that Kamala Harris does not have the same baggage as Joe Biden because whatever we might say, Kamala Harris is a lot younger, and Kamala Harris is obviously not struggling in the same ways that Joe Biden did.
Saying Kamala Harris is not struggling is an understatement. She is, right now, measurably thriving. Nobody knows who will win in November, but we have seen day after day the enthusiasm. Republicans can see her appeal for the same reason they push so hard at the DNC to feature anything that might feel somewhat cool or current, from Hulk Hogan to rap and Instagram star Amber Rose. Culture matters. And the Republican culture story right now isn't great for them. They have the oldest nominee ever with Biden's departure. And while Donald Trump did have a run in television and online at one point, his Apprentice show debuted 20 years ago. It's a relic of a reality TV past, and not one there are signs everyone wants to relive. Harris is tapping into the now and the future. That first campaign video they put out this past week, it rocks out to a star on the current charts, not the list from 20 years ago, not Hulk Hogan's glory days. It rocks out to Beyoncé's Freedom, one of the new Harris campaign anthems at rallies, and it comes with Beyoncé's seal of approval, a cue to many of her millions of fans. They go by the Bayhive, and many are talking up a new political K-Hive.
There are some people who think we should be a country of chaos, of fear, of hate. But us, we choose something different. We choose freedom.
Freedom, freedom, I can't move. Freedom, cut me loose.
In that song, Freedom, Beyoncé recounts fighting uphill battles in terms both personal and political. She says, freedom, where are you? Because I need freedom too. I break chains all by myself, tell the storm I'm new. I'm a walk, I'm a march on the regular, painting white flags blue. Beyoncé rejecting the typical white flag of surrender and painting it blue, a likely reference to empowering the next generation of young women and girls, as her daughter is named Blue, and one the K-Hive may run with for painting ballots blue for Democrats this year. And that has political appeal, but it's not just political posturing. Vice President Harris is clearly a longtime Beyoncé fan. She attended a show as vice president in the tour's official sparkle-themed attire, which she posted there earlier. As senator, she shouted out Beyoncé's Homecoming documentary for how it celebrates historically black colleges. Beyoncé has sent support back towards Harris, too. She broadcast this striking election year message in 2020, a Biden-Harris mask, to her 300 million-plus followers. And she's previously made appearances. She was on the dais for President Obama's historic first inaugural with her husband, Jay-Z, a star in his own right, who donned that unforgettable hat you see there on that icy day. And in contrast to, say, Hulk Hogan or Apprentice reruns, Beyoncé is very now. Just this week, Team USA debuting her official support with a slideshow for the Paris Olympics you can see there. And Beyoncé has devoted fans basically across the world in every demographic and age group. But let's be clear, pop culture is a language young people speak fluently. They were key to the Biden-Harris winning coalition. Harris knows she needs them now. And most voters don't like it if it's fake posturing. I will note there are MAGA fans who claim that they're cool with J.D. Vance going from calling Trump, quote, America's Hitler to now being on the ticket. But generally, honesty is better. And we can see the signs that Harris comes by her moment, this music and cultural moment, pretty honestly. Before there were any indications she might be atop the ticket this year, she was very tapped into Beyonce, as I mentioned. She used her platform to elevate artists and art forms that Washington has long ignored. She rejected the D.C. controversy talk about hip-hop and hosted her own 50th celebration for the art form. We reported that at the time. And there she is dancing. Lil Wayne and Jeezy performed live. And I can tell you tonight, amidst these new ad wars, that celebration is suddenly something of an American Rorschach test. Do you see energy, optimism, and inclusion there as Harris leans into all this authentically? Or do you see something else? Because the new Trump campaign attack ad out today opens with footage from that same rap celebration, as the Post notes in its coverage. And you can hear the almost comically ominous opening. I'm about to play a little part of the Trump ad where they reference Harris's immigration work while misleadingly claiming she was some sort of border czar. But listen to the tone as we have this national debate and they tell their version of this story.
This is America's border czar, and she's failed us. Under Harris, over 10 million illegally here. 250,000 Americans dead from fentanyl.
They could pick any clip. They picked that one. They think they're on offense. But they might be wrong. They might be on defense, or they might be high on their own supply, projecting that everyone else will have a negative reaction to that video. Now, Beyonce, for her part, has worked with another young artist from her hometown of Houston, Megan Thee Stallion. And here was Megan actually speaking about what Beyonce means to her.
Ever since I was little, I was like, you know what? One day, I'm gonna grow up and I'm gonna be like the rap Beyonce. I love the way she is. I love the way she carries herself. And my mama will always be like, Megan, what would Beyonce do? And I'm always like, you know what? What would Beyonce do? But let me make it a little ratchet.
What would Beyonce do? Well, I showed you Beyonce would support the 2020 Biden-Harris ticket. Beyonce would get involved in her own way, and Megan Thee Stallion, with a huge following, is doing that. She has made her own political anthem about women's rights with a music video that shows the person you see on the screen. That's an actor playing a seemingly conservative senator, complete with the red MAGA tie. And in the Megan Thee Stallion video, which was a big hit song, she shows this Republican going online to hypocritically attack her in misogynistic terms, by the way. And then in the song, which, like Beyonce, taps both personal and political and women's rights themes and freedom, she confronts this politician for disrespecting all the different women who actually run things.
The women that you accidentally trying to step on, or everybody that you depend on? They cook your meals, they haul your trash, they drive your ambulances, they guard you while you sleep.
The message there from Megan is telling this politician, who she sees as a hypocrite trying to control her body, that if he actually understood reality, he would understand what women of color, women around the country actually do every day, and why he has the wrong approach. Now, that's culture, that's fiction, you could say. It's a music video making a point, but it's also very resonant. Megan Thee Stallion using her platform, as Beyonce and others have, to argue for empowerment and against what they see as people taking them backwards. Now, why is this in the news tonight? If you watch this show regularly, you may say, is it because we love hip-hop? No, it's actually because it's national political news, as confirmed here. Megan Thee Stallion will be performing to open the Kamala Harris rally in Georgia, the South, where she has so many fans and followers, tonight. That same rally we showed you at the top of the broadcast and that you'll see Kamala Harris speak at. It's drawing headlines like this. It's still Hot Girl Summer for the Harris campaign, a reference to one of Megan Thee Stallion's big songs. If you get the reference, you're into the music. If you don't get the reference, that's okay. We're all learning as we go. But this is something Kamala gets, almost intuitively. This is happening fast because this campaign came out of nowhere last weekend, and it's happening organically. Consider it another song in the growing set list of this year's Camelot. Another pop star, Charli XCX, has rushed to back Harris online, and you've probably seen those viral memes or talk about them. They reference some of her work to talk about Brat Summer. So, is it Brat Summer? Is it political summer? Is it a hot girl summer? Is it a hot American summer? These are questions that will be answered. Are we witnessing another shift, an Obama-esque embrace with new characters and new people, and a history that, if you look into it, shows a lot of what I mentioned earlier, an authentic interest, personal and political?
Well, it's true. These guys are just weird. And it's, you know, they're running for He-Man Women Haters Club.
It's not just a weird style that he brings. It's that this leads to weird policies.
And by the way, don't you find some of their stuff to just be plain weird?
There are just some words, some attacks during campaign season that stick. George H.W. Bush was a wimp. John Kerry was a flip-flopper. And Dan Quayle wasn't smarter than a fifth grader. These attacks worked because they tapped into what the public already believed about these candidates. So what do people think about the GOP ticket this year? Well, it's obvious. Everybody thinks they're kind of weird. Tonight to talk about it, Tim Miller is the former spokesman for the Republican National Committee. He is now writer-at-large for The Bulwark, and Sarah Longwell is publisher of The Bulwark and host of the Focus Group podcast. They both join me now. Tim, I got to ask you this, because I started looking through history. When we were putting production together, I was like, yeah, this is hitting like wimp. This is hitting like flip-flopper. It seems like weird sticks. Why is that working? Why is that working not just with Trump? Because he's been the same guy all along, but now weird seems to be sticking to him. J.D. Vance is a newcomer. Weird is sticking to him. Why is it working?
Because of J.D. Vance. I just think it ended up being another in a short or medium length or maybe long line of reasons why Donald Trump shouldn't have picked J.D. Vance, why he's hurting the ticket. Here's the thing. Trump is weird in his own way. Right? He's like this celebrity figure. He was a reality show host. He almost kind of owns being weird. He does the electrocuting sharks thing and the Hannibal Lecter thing, and it's weird in its own way, but that didn't like stick with people. J.D. Vance is weird in this creepy way that you want him to be away from you. He has negative charisma. He starts talking about what, you know, when women should bear their children. And you start thinking, I don't want a weird and creepy guy like you having any say, actually, over when, you know, my daughter, or my sister, or myself, if I was a woman, my child is when I have a child. You know, like it's a turnoff. And I think that is now splashing back up onto Trump. And we saw this in the midterms work also as a very successful hit, particularly on Blake Masters in Arizona, who is very Vancian in the way that he's creepy and weird. And I think that bringing Vance onto this ticket raised the salience of this in a way that's the Democrats are really using with a lot of effect.
Yeah, Tim, I say this, and I've said this to many people, as a former Ohio resident and Ohio voter, J.D. Vance is not very well liked. People think he's weird there. There is not a bar in Niles, Youngstown, Toledo, or Akron that he could walk into right now and get a free beer. But there's a lot of other congressmen and members of sort of government there that could do it. So my question, Sarah, for you is, you've done a focus group on how people are responding to this ticket now. I want to play some sound from that and get your thoughts on the other side.
I don't remember where, but one of the vibes that I get off of him is that he comes up very like borderline arrogant. And I imagine like Trump to be also arrogant, like even during his speech and stuff. I don't think it's a good mix.
He kind of was against Trump in the past, so he's definitely switched a whole 180. But now he's taking on the bully portion. He's you know, just shaking the saber and kind of, he's really stirring the pot.
Now, Sarah, look, I want to couch these terms properly. Everybody understands different things about J.D. Vance, and he's new. People are still just getting a new impression of him. But the new impression seems to be bad. I mean, historically, most people don't get the nomination for vice president and then come out of the RNC with a lower approval rating. What are you hearing in these focus groups? And other than arrogance, why is it he's not connecting, and why is he dragging down Trump?
So here's one of the things that voters can sniff out really clearly.
which is inauthenticity, right? So Trump is weird, but he's like authentically weird. And he's got a celebrity factor that allow people to give him kind of the wiggle room that you give a celebrity. J.D. Vance was once a normal person who started to pretend to be a super weird person in order to get in the good graces of the MAGA crowd. And so that inauthenticity comes off as sort of creepy, as inauthentic, and the voters could just see that coming from a mile away. And frankly, people don't like him. I mean, this is what I've heard, and I didn't just do one group of swing voters. I have done now several groups of swing voters, and honestly, I have not seen voters as negative on a candidate since Trump voters after Mike Pence refused to overturn the election. Like, that's how sort of irritated these voters sound about J.D. Vance. And I think Tim kind of hit on something there that I think is really important, which is Donald Trump has a bunch of baked in baggage, right? He has a bunch of things about him that they know he's a misogynist. They know that he's, says all these off the wall things. They know that he's kind of a racist. But J.D. Vance, reanimates that for people. It reminds people of it. It draws it back out after it having been baked in for so long. And so the voters are suddenly saying, oh yeah, I remember that Trump is just also kind of a weird scumbag. And J.D. Vance has raised that salience.
Tim, I want to ask you this. It seems to me, and like I said, can't get into a bar. He's essentially the Ted Cruz of Ohio. I mean, they'll vote for the guy, but they can't stand him. J.D. Vance is sort of like the worst mini-me possible for Donald Trump, because as Sarah pointed out, he's like encapsulates all the terrible things about Donald Trump with none of the inherent charm. If you were consulting the Republican Party right now, just very quickly, what would you tell them to do? They're not going to drop the guy. It's only 98 days away from the election, but he is a drag on the campaign to the point where I think he's one or two bad rallies away from being a viral meme that they're never going to be able to escape.
Yeah, I think they definitely wish they could have dropped him, but they can't. They're stuck with him. Here's my advice, which I'm happy to give because I know they won't take it, because it's just not in their just not in the way of being in MAGA world. But J.D. Vance should stop with the fake tough guy act, stop with the attack dog act. He looks uncomfortable in his own skin. He's not natural. He comes off as arrogant, as that focus group voter said. And instead, he should just go back to talking about how working class people in the Midwest need help and talk about policy issues and act kind of like a nerd. I don't know how much that would actually help them, but I think that would at least stanch the bleeding a little bit. But I don't think these guys can help themselves besides be cruel. And so I don't think that that's advice that they're going to take.
Yeah, they're just going to be weird, and they're going to run with it, even if it makes them lose the race. Sarah Longwell and Tim Miller, thank you so much for joining us tonight on All In.
Vice President Kamala Harris walking out to her walk-on song, Freedom, by, of course, the great Beyonce, who cleared that music for her. Quite a speech in Atlanta, Georgia, and I think she kind of enjoyed it. Let's go through a little bit of what she said. She opened right away, getting some love there. We'll just continue to watch that in the crowd while we kind of recap it just a little bit. Vice President Harris went right to her past roles as a prosecutor, saying she took on predators of all kinds, and then named several kinds of predators, for-profit colleges, said Trump's done that, sexual abusers, Trump's done that, big banks who were charged with fraud. And then she said Trump, of course, has been convicted of fraud, to which the crowd began to chant, lock him up. She said she'd proudly put her record against Donald Trump's any day of the week. Then she went right to immigration, one of the issues that is going to be difficult for Democrats to deal with, but she wasn't afraid of it, went right to it, talking about being an attorney general of a border state, talking about prosecuting those who violated the law, saying that Donald Trump talks a big game but does not walk the walk. And then she quoted Quavo, who was on stage two persons before her, saying that Donald Trump does not walk it like he talks it. A little cultural reference there for the crowd. Got a big cheer for that. She then also talked about the border bill that Donald Trump blocked, saying that he does not care about immigration. He only cares about himself. She said she will bring back that border bill and she will sign it as president. Number three, she then went to the differences between the Trump vision and the vision that she and her campaign are bringing, meaning that the one vision, the Trump vision, is focused on the past, and the other is focused on the future. That's a big theme of this campaign. And then she went into some of the things that she believes people need to have the freedom to do, building intergenerational wealth, a big issue in Fulton County, Georgia, where that message, I think, resonates with a lot of younger voters, particularly young African-American men who have talked about, needing to hear more economic issues. She talked about bringing down the cost of living, standing up to corporate landlords who are unfairly raising rents. She talked about Trump's plan that would raise prices and make things less affordable than they are now. And then she closes with, "We are not going back." And then she goes into the war on freedom. She says the baton is in our hands, and it's the highest form of patriotism to fight for the ideals of our country. And then she landed with Donald Trump pulling out of that debate. She said, "Donald Trump doesn't want to debate her, but she sure has a lot to say about me," was her quote. And she said, "If you got something to say, Donald, say it to my face." Still with me here at the table, Alencia Johnson and Sarah Matthews. What did you think of what you heard, Alencia?
I mean, listen, that was the presidential speech. And the Kamala Harris that, I know, Joy, we were talking about this, and a lot of people saw when she was Attorney General, when she was in the Senate. But her message is so clear. And this energy that she's getting is showing her confidence on stage, right? She's not lying. She's going through Donald Trump's rap sheet, which are all facts, and then going through this vision of America, which she literally represents what Project 2025 was designed to not exist in this country. The woman of color, daughter of immigrants, about to be president of the United States. The other thing I want to talk about, we've been talking about this cultural moment that we're having, and I know Republicans are probably going to brush it off as celebrities just endorsing.
They did that with Obama, too.
They did, but Quavo has been in D.C. multiple times with the White House and their Office of Gun Violence Prevention, because that's an issue near and dear to his heart. Meg Thee Stallion has been a huge proponent of climate change, abortion rights, so many issues. And so you see these people who have huge platforms when it comes to their artistry now realizing that their voice on issues that matter to them as humans can actually be represented. And I think we're going to continue to see even more of that. I mean, Beyonce greenlit Freedom because she wrote a song about this moment.